There is also a misconception, isn't there, with regards to the Jews, Michael, in that the biblical Jews, people perceive them kind of under the belief that they are the ancestors, of the modern day religious Jews, when in fact, as you've highlighted, the biblical Jews were in fact very much tied in with these Athenists that you speak about, Michael.
That's right, and they're not the only ones, of course. But there's been a play of words. Mm-hmm. There's been a historical misconstruement. Partly the Jews are to blame for that because they know very little about their own history in the same way that Christians know very little about their history and how it relates to paganism. Mm. Any of the Jews who knew the truth and tried to speak up were immediately silenced. Zionism is a form of Atonism, a political wing of Atonism that poses in order to operate in the world. There's been a smokescreen created. So what we know today as modern Protestantism, Catholicism, Islam, and Judaism are basically fronts. They're basically a camouflage, hodgepodges, thrown together quite hastily in more recent times, historically, so that this Atonism can work behind them in the same way that it works behind the Templars and the Rosicrucians and the Knights of Malta and the Freemasons. Atonism, I've gone into this in so much detail in the books, you see, operates indirectly because they have their own enemies. They're worried about infighting, and they're also they have a big plan. The plan is the conquest of the earth, and they know that can't be done under a single flag where they can be identified. So these people have learned to be surreptitious from the fall of Akhenaton. When the fall of Akhenaton taught them such a big lesson, and in their mind's eye, just like in the James Bond movie, the world is not enough. That actual term, the world is not enough, is actually a Freemasonic motto, and it is absolutely, I believe, originates with the megalomaniacal ambitions of either Akhenaton himself after his fall, or given that he died early, his immediate descendants decided that, look, if we've lost the Nile, which was, of course, the most civilized place on earth at that time, if we've lost this, nothing will replace it but the conquest of the entire planet. Rome is not enough. They had many friends in Rome. Atonists were well set up in Greece and Rome, but the elite Egyptians of Akhenaton's descendants merely going and as house guests to distant relatives, even though they may have been ideologically on the same page, turning up with their bags in hand, so to speak, at the door of their Roman patrician friends and Greek friends was not the order of the day. These were elites. These were absolutely the top people in the world, and they're not going to, accept guest rooms in the houses of their lower level mates. They might have done that temporarily. So these people wanted complete dominion, and their idea was that if we can't have Egypt, then the only way to replace that is to have complete domination of the world. And my book tries to go into the fact that then I know where their next headquarters was. Their next headquarters was actually the British Isles.
Right.
And from there, they not only conceived Christianity, we know that Christianity was born in the Middle East, but that's not where it was conceived. Atonism, or what we know today, going back to your original point, Matthew, was that the Judaisms that we know today, in fact, the Judeo-Christianity we know today, is an Egyptoid/Atonism, conceived in Britain, by the way, and then transplanted, because it also had a mercantile side. This was an imperial religion that was going to help galvanize markets and colonize the world. You can't do that from Little Britain, so they sent their agents, people who were already long ensconced in those lands, closer to the Mediterranean. So the people who propounded Judeo-Christianity did it in the Middle East, but it actually had been conceived in the far west, and it was a very much elements of Druidism, plagiarized Druidism, that animated it. And so that's why today you have in Christianity unbelievable pagan motifs, many Druidic motifs, and many people who haven't done their homework blame Druidism as if it is also culpable in some sort of conspiratorial sense. No. The Druids were one of the first people wiped out by these Atonists upon their arrival in Ireland, and their teachings were stolen. So let's identify the criminal. The work of the Druids was for all of mankind. The work of the Atonists was for their own dominion, you see, over the rest of the world. And the unfolding of history, as I see it, is conspiratorial and very much has these Atonists and their symbolism. throughout the world. But again, as I say, they've cloaked it in a pseudo-Judaic form, so that if anyone was to become savvy to any of this, they'd be immediately down all these cul-de-sacs, and it would be labyrinthine, because the symbols are apparently Jewish, but they're actually Judaic. And there's a world of difference between Jewish, when you talk about the religious man. That word wasn't even created until the 1800s, Jew, and Judaic, which is a very ancient term, and it relates not to a race, but to a sect, to a cult.
Right.
And anybody from any religion could be members of that cult. There were Scythians, they could have been Syrians, they could have been Sudanese, they could have been African, they could be white, they could be Cretans. And this is a worldwide solar cult. And solar cultism can be found in India, southern and northern, China, India, Ireland, Norway, Sweden. Everywhere you go, you find solar cultism. Race has nothing to do with it whatsoever. It has to do with caste and creed and cult. Nothing at all to do with race. And the people who say that it has to do with race are these mythmongers and deceivers who try to lead you off in the wrong direction.
Yeah. I mean, Michael, you know the Hyksos themselves. I think you mentioned it was the 13th dynasty that they actually invaded Egypt.
Yeah.
And then was it that their reign was then on to the 18th dynasty also? Yeah.
Yeah, the very first pharaoh of the beginning of the 18th dynasty kicked them out, or let's say they had wars, and this great pharaoh Ahmose, meaning the moon,
right?
The god, pharaoh of the moon. Mos means basically son, like Moses,
right?
Son of the moon, right? He confronted them and said, "We've had enough of these tyrants." And some scholars say it was an all-out fight.
Okay.
Others say it was a fight, but then it ended with an agreement that the Hyksos would leave. So some people, we don't know if the Hyksos, some documents looked like it was an agreement with the pharaoh that we will now leave because we know we're not wanted and we're going to leave. And if you give us all the treasures we want, we'll depart in good faith and get out of here. And that's one strong theory. I think it was the true case. Others in the earlier years, before the Ralph Ellis's, before the last scholarship that's been done, thought it was an all-out bloody battle and that the Hyksos were forced to leave. These are, again, minor points. The fact is, yes, they departed during or weakened. But you see, what I think is this. You may have the mass of the ordinary people being exiled to another region of Egypt, but the elites who are already ensconced as priests, high-level Hyksos, high-level bloodline Hyksos, they're not just going to up and leave, because these are people that are now embedded in the business, in not only the business areas but the government and the civil. You see, you're going to have this coterie that might not go with the new status quo, but they're still ensconced.
Yeah.
And I believe that this was the case. That's why the Atonism has a Hyksos slant to it, because I don't think all the Hyksos were thrown out. I don't think they could have been. You see,